Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And don't forget to support me on Patreon. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Your support helps me keep this channel going and continue creating more videos for you. Now, let's get into the video. So I was doing trail maintenance up near Kittredge County. This was 2017. Late September, going into October. The Forest Service contracts out some of that work before hunting season. Clearing deadfall, flagging problem trees, that kind of thing. It's not complicated work. I'd done it before. My supervisor on that job was a guy named Randy. Randy was the kind of person who'd been doing outdoor labor long enough that he stopped really talking about it. He had a generator and a trailer with the equipment 2 miles south of where I was set up. And we'd agreed I'd camp near the fire road to cut down on drive time. Made sense on paper. The area I was clearing was too far from his site to make the commute worth it every day. So I was alone up there. That part matters. The first thing I noticed was the coffee mug. I had one of those enamel camping mugs. Blue, handle was a little bent from when I dropped it a couple seasons back. I used it every morning. Set it on the folding table by the stove, same spot. One morning I came out of the tent and it wasn't there. I looked around, figured I'd moved it without thinking. And then I found it sitting on a stump about 30 feet from camp, upside down. And there were pine needles tucked under the rim, like arranged there. Not just fallen, set there in a little row. I stood there looking at it for probably longer than I should have. Then I picked it up, shook the needles out and went back and made coffee. I figured it was Randy. He'd driven up early, I hadn't heard him, he thought he was being funny. Randy wasn't really a joking person, but it was the only thing that made sense, so I went with it. When I drove down to his site the next morning to get fuel, I brought it up. He was standing next to the generator in the same hoodie he always wore, coughing into his thermos. And he asked me if I'd brought extra fuel before I even finished the sentence. He hadn't been to my site. The generator had been cutting out all night and he'd been dealing with it. He wasn't lying, you can tell. So that was the mug. I went back up and kept working. The weather was wet that whole stretch. Everything damp. The ground soft enough that you left prints in it if you stepped off the path. I was flagging dead trees in the afternoons, working maybe a half-mile from camp in either direction. Sometimes in the early evening, I'd hear engines down below the hills. Logging trucks maybe, or ATVs. Nothing that seemed close. It was that kind of area. You'd get noise carrying from far away and then it would just stop. One evening I came back to camp and my folding chair was facing the wrong way. I had a camp chair, the kind that folds flat. I always folded it before I left in the morning and leaned it against the log next to the fire ring. Every morning. That's just what I did. This evening I came back and it was open, set up facing into the trees instead of toward the fire. Just sitting there like someone had been using it. I looked at it for a second. I checked the tent. Nothing moved. Nothing was open that I'd closed. I turned the chair around, sat in it for a while and went to bed. After that, I started paying attention. Not in a dramatic way, just the way you do when something's been bothering you, and you can't explain it. I started noticing where I put things before I left in the morning. Cooler latch angled left, I checked it. Lantern on the right hook on the rope I'd strung between 2 trees, I checked it. Boots under the cot, same spot every morning, I checked. And every evening when I came back, one thing was different. Just one. Never more than one. The latch would be angled right instead of left. The lantern would be on the left hook. Boots moved to the other side of the cot. It was never anything taken. It was never anything broken or knocked over. Just one thing moved carefully, and then left that way. I drove down to Randy's site 3 days in a row and had him account for his time. He thought I was acting strange. Maybe I was, but I needed to know. And each time he had reasons he'd been where he'd been, and none of them involved my camp. I believed him each time. I went through what else it could be. Animals can move things. Raccoons, bears, they'll get into a camp, but a bear doesn't angle a cooler latch. A raccoon doesn't put the boots on the other side. And whatever was doing this wasn't getting into the food. The cooler hadn't been opened. The food bag I hung was still hung. Whatever was coming into camp wasn't interested in food. I started thinking about whether there was anyone else in the area. It was before hunting season, so no hunters yet, but that didn't mean no one. There are people who camp off trail, people who don't really want to be found. I'd worked enough of these jobs to know that. I thought maybe someone had set up somewhere I couldn't see, and they were coming through curious and doing this as some kind of thing. I didn't know what kind of thing, but I kept coming back to that word, deliberate. Whatever was happening was deliberate. I went looking one afternoon instead of flagging. I took maybe 2 hours and walked the perimeter of the area around camp, looking for signs. I found boot prints in one spot, on the soft ground between two firs, maybe 40 feet from camp. The tread was clear, not my boots. Different sole pattern, and the prints were pointed toward camp, not away from it. I stood there and looked at them for a while. I didn't know how old they were. Ground had been wet for days. Could have been a week old. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing things, but that's normal in the woods at night. You hear things. Most of it's nothing. On the fourth night, this was late, maybe 2 in the morning by the time I checked my watch afterward. I woke up because of a sound right outside the tent. The tent was one of those older canvas wall tents, big enough to stand in, heavier material. The sound was breathing. Someone breathing through their nose, slow, a little congested, right on the other side of the canvas from where my head was. I lay there. I didn't move. I was trying to work out if I was still half asleep and hearing something else, an animal, something normal. But it kept going, slow in, slow out. Patient, just sitting there breathing. I reached for the flashlight. I had it on the ground right next to the cot. Always kept it there. My hand was on it, and whoever was outside said quietly, "Don't turn that on." Not loud. Not a yell. Just a voice, low, calm, like they were just passing along information. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Long enough that my arms started cramping. At some point the breathing stopped. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anything. It just stopped. I stayed in the tent until it was light enough to see. Then I got up and went outside, and there was nothing there except the same camp, the same trees, the same wet ground. I walked the perimeter again. I found where the grass was pressed down on the south side of the tent, near the head of my cot, on the other side of the canvas. A patch of ground maybe 2 feet across where something had been. Sitting, maybe. Or crouching. I don't know. I packed up that morning. I drove down to Randy's site and told him I was done with the northern section, that I'd work out of his site for the rest of the contract and drive up. He looked at me for a second and didn't ask why. We worked out the rest of the contract that way. I never reported it. What would I have said? I didn't see anyone. I couldn't prove the boot prints were recent. I had a patch of pressed down grass and a voice that told me not to turn on my flashlight. I've thought about it a lot since then. Not constantly, but it comes back. What I keep coming back to is the mug, the pine needles, the way they were set in a row. That's the part I can't get past. Not even the voice, the pine needles, because whatever you're picturing when you imagine something like that, the patience it takes to do something like that, to stop and take the time to do something that careful when you're in someone's camp, without being asked. I don't know who it was. I don't know what they wanted. They could have come in any night and done whatever they were going to do, and I wouldn't have known until it happened. But they didn't. They just moved things and watched and breathed outside my tent in the dark. I don't work solo contracts anymore. That's the main thing that changed. The reservation fell through the night before we were supposed to check in. That's the first thing. We'd been planning this fishing trip for 3 months, and the hotel just... They said something about a pipe burst. They'd send a partial refund. That was it. Maya is my girlfriend. She's the one who found the campground on her phone while I was driving. Because at that point, it was 9 at night. and neither of us wanted to turn around and go home. It was in northern Ontario, the campground. A couple hours off the main highway, down a road that Google Maps seemed less and less confident about, the further we went. Maya was reading directions off her phone, and the signal kept dropping. And we'd had an argument earlier about the hotel deposit, whether we'd get it back, how much we'd already spent on gear. So by the time we pulled in, it was close to midnight and we weren't really talking. Not a bad silence exactly. Just the kind where you're both tired and you've already said the things you had to say. The rain had stopped maybe 20 minutes before we got there. The gravel was wet, and our headlights made it look like there was water sitting on top of everything. The lake was through the trees on the left side. I remember seeing it when we pulled in because it was so flat and dark it didn't look like water. It looked like the trees just stopped, and there was nothing there. There were two other campers. I noticed them because I always look when I pull into somewhere new. There was an RV at the site farthest from the entrance. Older couple, lights off, they were clearly asleep. And there was a dome tent. Just the tent, no car, which I thought was a little odd but not enough to think about. At the site directly across from the one we took. The tent had a light on inside. That dim glow you get from a lantern or a phone. We set up mostly in the dark. Maya held the flashlight while I staked the tent, and neither of us talked much. She kept rubbing her thumbnail against her lip, which she does when she's thinking about something she doesn't want to say out loud yet. I've been with her 4 years, so I know all of this. I just didn't ask about it because I was tired and I figured it was still about the money. We got into the tent around 12:30. I remember checking my phone for the time. Maya was already lying down by the time I got my boots off. I woke up maybe 40 minutes later. I had to pee and I lay there for a while thinking I could wait until morning. And then I couldn't wait. So I unzipped the tent and went out. The first thing I noticed was that the other tent was gone. Not like fallen over. Not like someone had taken it down and left the poles scattered. Gone. That whole site across from us was just empty. I stood there trying to remember if I'd misread which site they were on when we pulled in. Whether maybe it had been a different spot. But no, it was directly across from us. I could see the flat rectangle where the footprint of the tent had pressed down the wet grass. Still wet. Still flat. I stood there for probably a full minute. I kept waiting to hear something. Car that had left while we were asleep. Someone loading up because they had to leave early. An engine somewhere down the road. But there was nothing. No insects either, which I noticed then. Not like they'd gone quiet when I walked out. More like they hadn't been going at all and I was only now noticing. The lake behind the trees was completely still. No water sounds, which is unusual because there had been wind earlier. I walked to the edge of our site, which put me maybe 15 feet from where the tent had been, and I looked at the ground around it. There was no gear, no fire ring stuff, no bags, nothing left behind. The two stakes I'd noticed earlier because they were a different color than the grass, orange, they were gone too. I'm not sure why I remembered the stakes, but I did. The light I'd seen through the tent earlier, phone or lantern or whatever it was, that was gone. Nothing to indicate anyone had been there except the pressed down grass. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that I forgot why I'd come outside in the first place. I was just standing at the edge of our site looking at the empty space and listening to nothing. And then something crossed between the sites. It came from the left, which was the direction of the lake, and it moved toward the right, which was toward the trees and the road. It was not fast. It was not trying to be quiet. It just walked, or it did something that looked enough like walking that my brain filed it that way. I only saw pieces of it because of the trees between us. It was pale, a gray pale, though I was working with almost no light, so I can't say that with certainty. It was large, not bare large, not that shape. Taller and narrower, and the shoulders, this is the part I keep coming back to because I can't find a way to make it make sense. The shoulders were too high and too close together. They came up almost level with where a head should be, but the head, if there was one, was lower, set forward. Like I said, it's the shape that I keep trying to work out. The way a moose is shaped wrong if you think about how the weight is distributed. Not wrong like broken, just wrong for what you expect. It moved through the light gap between two trees, and I could see it more clearly for maybe 2 seconds, and then it was behind the next tree. It walked. That's all I can say with certainty. It walked from left to right across the campsite in a way that was unhurried, like it wasn't trying to avoid being seen, but also wasn't aware of me. I don't know. I did not move while it was moving. I want to be clear about that because some of the time I've told this, I've made it sound more deliberate than it was. I didn't choose to stay still. I just did. Then Maya said my name from inside our tent, just my name. She does this sometimes when she half wakes up and reaches over and I'm not there. She said my name and I could hear she was almost asleep still. The thing between the trees stopped. Not slowly. Stopped. I waited for it to start again, to keep moving, to react somehow. It didn't move. I couldn't see it clearly anymore because it had gone behind another trunk, but I could see enough to know it hadn't moved. And then from somewhere near the lake, on the other side of the campsite entirely, to my left, there was a sound. It was Maya's voice. Not similar. Not close. Her voice. The same note it had on her name when she said it. That almost asleep sound. The way her vowels go when she's not fully awake. It said my name. I turned to look at the tent. The zipper was still closed. The tent was dark. She'd gone back to sleep. Looked back to where the thing had been, and I could not tell anymore if there was still something there or if I was looking at a tree trunk. I waited. I don't know for how long. I went back to the tent and got in. Maya was asleep. I lay there and I did not sleep for the rest of the night. When it started getting light, I went outside and looked at the area between the sites, and there was nothing there. I looked at the spot where the tent had been, and the grass had already started coming back up. We left that morning before the older couple in the RV were up. Maya asked me why we were leaving early, and I said I hadn't slept well. She didn't push it. We drove back to the highway and we ended up doing our fishing off a public dock further south, which was fine. I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about the voice near the lake. There are explanations I've tried. Sound carrying across water in a certain way. Echoes doing something strange in that kind of flat, wet air after rain. I've looked into it. I can't find anything that explains why it would have been her voice specifically, and not just a sound in the same register. I can't explain the tent being gone. I can't explain the shape I saw. And I know what animals are in that part of Ontario, and I've spent a lot of time trying to fit what I saw onto one of them, and I can't. I've never told Maya because I'm not sure what I would say. I don't know what telling her would do. She'd want to know why I didn't say anything at the time, and I don't have a good answer for that, except that I walked back to the tent, and I got in and I lay down and I didn't say anything. That's pretty much it. That's everything I can say about it. My brother called me about 2 weeks after his divorce was finalized. He said he needed to get out somewhere with no signal, and he wanted me to come. We are not that close, if I'm being honest. We talk at Christmas and sometimes when something goes wrong, but he sounded like something was wrong and not the kind he could name, so I said yes. He picked me up early on a Friday. He had already packed the truck. I threw my bag in the back and noticed there was a lot of gear for 2 people, but I didn't say anything right then because I figured he was just being thorough, that this was part of whatever he needed to do to feel okay. He had been through a bad stretch. His wife had left. He had been staying in a short-term rental for 3 months. I thought maybe packing a lot was the kind of thing that helped him feel like he had things handled. The drive was about 4 hours. He didn't talk much. He had the route memorized or he had driven it before, I couldn't tell which. We got off the highway, went on a state road for a while, then turned onto something unpaved that wasn't marked. I asked him how he knew about this place, and he said a guy from work had told him about it. He didn't say which guy. I didn't ask. The campsite was at the end of a canyon. When I say canyon, I mean a flat area with walls of pale rock on two sides, and a long wash of white stone visible below where the ground dropped off. It was late August, hot during the day in a way that felt physical, like pressure. Cold fast once the sun went down. Dust was everywhere. If you set something down on a rock, it had a film of dust on it within an hour. We set up the tent and started unloading, and that's when I noticed the food. He had packed enough for probably 4 people over a weekend. Canned stuff, bread, a cooler with meat and eggs. I mentioned it while I was handing things out of the truck, and he just said it was better to have enough. I said we'd never eat all of it. He said we'd figure it out. He was already moving to the next thing, so I let it go. Then I noticed the chairs. 4 of them. Folding chairs, the kind with the armrests, still in their carry bags. I took them out one at a time and counted. 4. I said, "Hey, you grabbed an extra couple of chairs." He looked at them and said, "Yeah." I waited for him to say why, and he didn't. There was only 1 lantern, but there were a lot of batteries. More than you'd need for a weekend. I stacked them on the camp table and didn't say anything. That night we cooked and ate, and he talked some about the divorce. Not a lot. He said it had been coming for a while. He said he was okay. He didn't look okay, but I don't know what okay looks like for him. We are not close enough for me to know that. When it got cold, we put more wood on the fire and sat for a while. I went to bed around 10 because there was nothing else to do. I woke up around 3. I know it was around 3 because I checked my phone. My brother was talking. Not loudly. It was the volume you'd use if you were on the phone and didn't want to wake someone up. Low and even. I lay there for a minute thinking he must have found signal somehow and was on a call. But we had checked when we arrived and there was nothing. Not even one bar. I unzipped the tent a little bit and looked out. He was sitting in one of the chairs by the fire pit. The fire was low. He was facing slightly away from me so I couldn't see his face. He was talking, and then he'd stop for a bit and then he'd talk again. The pauses were the length of pauses in a conversation where someone else is speaking. He nodded once while I was watching. I didn't go out. I don't know why exactly. I just didn't. I zipped the tent back up and lay there, and eventually I went back to sleep. In the morning he was up before me making coffee. He seemed fine. Normal, or what passed for normal on that trip. I came out and there were 3 cups set out on the flat rock beside the camp stove. Not 2, 3. I stood there looking at them. I asked him who the 3rd cup was for. He turned around and looked at me for a moment before he said I had used it. He said I'd come out earlier and had some coffee and gone back to sleep. He said it like it was a thing that had happened. I hadn't. I had been in the tent. I know I had been in the tent. I said I didn't think I'd done that. And he said I had, matter of fact, the way you'd tell someone something they'd forgotten. He turned back to the stove. I looked at the cup. It had been used. There were grounds in the bottom and a dark ring inside. I didn't say anything else about it. I took one of the other cups and poured my coffee and sat down. We hiked a little that morning, not far, along the edge of the wash. The stone was pale and the sound was strange out there. You could hear things from a long way off, pebbles moving. At one point I heard what sounded like footsteps somewhere below us in the wash, and I stopped and listened, and my brother kept walking, and I had to catch up. That afternoon I walked around the back of the campsite, the side that faced the canyon wall, and I found footprints in the dust back there. 3 sets going into the canyon. I stopped and looked at them. The dust in that area was fine and held tracks well. 2 of the sets had shoe prints, tread pattern visible. 1 set was bare feet. Small, I thought, but the prints had been partially disturbed, so I wasn't sure. I called my brother over. I said, "Come look at this." He came and looked at them, and his face did something I couldn't read, and then he got irritated. Not at me, or maybe at me, I couldn't tell. He was embarrassed in some way. That's the only word I have for it. He kicked dust over the prints before I had gotten a good look. Started to say something, and he said, "The wind moved things around back here, that it wasn't what it looked like." I asked him what it looked like, and he said he meant the tracks were probably from before we got there, from whoever had been here last. I didn't say anything to that because I didn't know what to say. He cooked dinner that night. A lot of it, more than 2 people could eat. He put out 2 plates but had made enough for more. When I mentioned it, he said he always overcooked. He said his ex-wife used to tell him that. It was the first time he had mentioned her by role since we'd left. He said it flat and moved on, and I didn't follow it. We sat by the fire. The canyon sounds were different at night. Bigger. You'd hear something shift way out in the wash and it would be loud because of the way the rock carried it. My brother kept looking out toward the darkness past the edge of camp. Not obviously, just checking. I asked him at some point if he was sleeping okay. He said yeah. He said he slept fine out here. Had been watching him for 2 days, and he did not look like someone who was sleeping fine. We sat there until the fire got low, and then he said something I've been thinking about since. He said, "When you go to bed, don't come out of the tent tonight no matter who shows up after dark." He said it like he was passing on advice, like it was practical information I needed. I asked him what he meant. He said sometimes people came through, hikers or whoever, and it wasn't always great to engage with them at night, that it was easier to just stay put. I said we were on an unmarked service road 4 hours from anything. He said yeah, people still came through. I watched him for a second and he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the fire. I went to bed. I lay in my sleeping bag with my boots next to me. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with the boots. I just wanted them there. I don't know what time it was when I heard him talking again. Not in the tent. Outside, the same as the night before. Same volume, same rhythm. I lay there. I thought about what he had said. I stayed in the tent. At some point the talking stopped. I heard the camp chair shift. I heard him move around. Then quiet, I did not hear anyone else. I want to be clear about that. I did not hear another voice. I did not hear footsteps. I heard him talking with the pauses of a conversation where another person is talking, and then I heard nothing. In the morning, he was fine. He ate breakfast. He was a little tired looking. He packed up the camp like he had a system, which he did. Everything in a specific order. 4 chairs back in their bags. On the drive home, I tried twice to get at what had happened. I said something about the footprints. He said he didn't remember what I was talking about. I said the tracks behind the camp, and he said he remembered looking at some marks in the dust, but that they were probably old. I asked if he wanted to talk about the weekend. He said it was good. He said he felt better. He looked at the road and I looked at the road and we drove. He dropped me off at my place and thanked me for coming. He said he'd been needing that. He seemed, and I keep coming back to this word, he seemed relieved. Like a thing had been settled. I still have the photo I took of the footprints before he kicked dust over them. It's not a great photo. I was just pointing my phone fast before he could do anything. You can see 2 sets of tracks with tread. You can see something that might be the 3rd set. The small bare ones. It's not clear enough to prove anything. I don't know what it would prove anyway. I've called him a few times since. He sounds okay. He sounds better than he did before the trip. He hasn't mentioned the canyon or going back. I don't know who he was talking to out there. I don't know who the 3rd cup was for or whose feet made those tracks. I don't know who he meant when he said no matter who arrives after dark. I've thought about it a lot and I keep getting to the same wall. I have the things I saw and I don't have anything that connects them. That's all I've got.